Dr. Lindy Elkins again.
Thank you. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Dave Williams. Dave is an astronaut. He is an aquanaut. He is a jet pilot. Are you with me here? He's an emergency room doctor, and he's Canadian. He holds the record for the most spacewalks, and he is an officer of the Order of Canada, and he has logged 13 million kilometers in space. So please welcome Dr. Dave Williams.
Goodness, I am so excited to be here, and strap your seatbelts because we're about to go for a ride. It's going to be a really exciting journey talking about human spaceflight and some of the experiences I've been able to have over the course of my career. Personally, I believe the human species is a spacefaring species. When you're out in space and you see images like this, you develop what we call the planetary perspective. You realize that there's no borders separating countries that you can see from space. In fact, when you're in space looking back at the planet, you realize that we're all in this together. And as we go forward and explore space, we're going there on the behalf of humanity. And we recognize, of course, that space is just one of the remaining final frontiers. The undersea world is the other remaining final frontier that we have to focus on. We're now celebrating the 50th anniversary of Apollo, but more importantly, the 500th anniversary of Magellan. Magellan circumnavigated the globe, led us all to understand that the world, in fact, is a circular, a spherical object. And in fact, it took 3 years for Magellan to be able to complete that voyage. In the Apollo missions, we went from 3 years to understanding the world is spherical to being able to go to the moon in 3 days. So you think about that, 3 years to 3 days. You know, this image really changed our understanding of our own planet and helped us realize that when we go to space, we do it to further understand the world in which we live. But I'm actually very excited to share with you that it is impressive going to the moon in 3 days. I've actually cycled around the world in 90 minutes. Because, of course, when you're in space, you orbit the planet every 90 minutes. And if you climb on the cycle ergometer on the space station or the cycle ergometer on the space shuttle and you cycle away for 90 minutes, you've gone all the way around the world. So, you know, there are some cyclists that think they're pretty fast, but, you know, we're pretty proud of our accomplishments in the human space program. So I was a little kid growing up in that decade of exploration, the 1960s. I was 7 years old in 1961 when Alan Shepard lifted off to go into space. And like all 7-year-olds naively, I said, I want to be an astronaut. And I was told that was impossible. And I asked, well, why is it impossible? Why can't I be an astronaut? And the answer I got was, because you're Canadian. And I like, really? You know, so I was wondering, well, what's this all about? Well, it turns out, of course, back in those days, the United States and Russia were the only countries sending humans into space. Canada launched the third satellite into space, but it wasn't until the 1980s that Canada got a space program. So I thought, well, if I can't be an astronaut and go to outer space, I want to scuba dive and become an aquanaut. And Jacques Cousteau and Canadian diving doctor, Dr. Joan McGuinness, I'd read about their exploits in National Geographic. It was just absolutely incredible. So I started diving when I was 12 years old, using the U.S. Navy Diver's Manual to learn about the physics and physiology of diving, something that my teachers thought that was absolutely beyond my capacity, because I was really a totally average student. In fact, if you asked my teacher who's going to be the astronaut, they probably would have picked 10 other people. But it was amazing to be able to do this at age 12. And then, ironically, I actually go to space first. I went to space twice before I did my first undersea research mission. So it's just funny how these things work out. For me, the definition of exploration, and it took me 55 years to figure this out. I apologize, I'm a little slow. But the definition of exploration is a relentless quest for knowledge. And yes, I'm an emergency physician, and I'm a neuroscientist, and I've done all these other things. It took me until about age 55 that I realized I'm actually an explorer. And that's what's so exciting, is that we're all here as explorers, sharing our story of exploration and what we learn in these remarkable environments. I worked as an emergency trauma physician in Toronto. before joining the space program in 1992. And yes, every time I was in space, I treated my crew members as a physician and used prescription medications to be able to do it. But when I got selected in the program, my line was, if you're going to send humans into space, we need to have doctors to be able to go on these missions with the crew to keep the crew healthy and things. It seemed to work out. If you're ever in an astronaut selection, you have the chance to use the line, use the line. You never know how it'll work for you. My first space flight was in 1998, a mission dedicated to understanding how the brain adapted to being in space. And because we can do these things, it's so amazing what we can do in the space program, but because we can do these things, we called the Cajal Institute in Madrid, and we flew histological specimens from the collection of Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who won the Nobel Prize in 1906, and we flew them in space. Because it's something that every neuroscientist in the world would resonate with. So that's the crew for Neurolab, a remarkable group of individuals, but of course, you have to have fun in the mission. So we were down in Hollywood. We fly to Hollywood because we wanted to ask Steven Spielberg if we could use the logo Pinky in the Brain. So while we're in Hollywood, we're getting the tour, we're on the set of Star Trek, you got to swap uniforms, right? They're going, whoa, it's like real astronauts. And we're going, whoa, it's like actors and actresses. So we swapped uniforms, got the photo, and the rest is history. It's all good. But in space, there is no up and there is no down. So I'm, of course, back, this is back in the mustache days. That's me in the upper right-hand corner, And you can vote on the mustache if you like it or you don't like it, whatever. But if I were looking at this group in that photograph, you are all upside down. I'm actually right side up. And the reason being is that in space, wherever your head is up. And that's an important point to remember when you have a chance to do a spacewalk, which is a totally different experience. You look out the window of the space shuttle or the space station, and you see this beautiful planet that we live on. And of course, you realize it is a blue planet, 70% of the surface of the Earth, covered by oceans. And you look at this spectacular photograph of the tongue of the ocean, and it reminds us that we can actually use undersea exploration to help us learn how to explore other planets in our solar system. So NASA in 2001 started sending astronauts to the Aquarius Undersea Research Habitat. There's a picture in 2006. I was the commander of this underwater mission. Lasted 18 days, a remarkable experience. The habitat is basically like a big inverted bucket. So imagine a bucket turned upside down in the water. The water doesn't enter because the pressure inside is equal to the pressure of the seawater around it. And there's an air fluid interface that you can see right here called the wet porch. And to get in the habitat, you swim into the wet porch, you stick your head up, you climb up the stairs, and you live and you work in this unique undersea research habitat, in our case for 18 days. And we did things like remote telerobotic surgery with a surgical robot on the habitat and a surgeon 2,000 miles away in Canada operating the robot to see what we need to do to get ready to send humans back to the moon. Space station is an unbelievable structure, and the single most important lesson of the International Space Station has never been written about. The lesson of the space station is the lesson of international collaboration. Countries coming together from all over the world to build the most complex piece of technology in history and have humans doing research on it to help send humans farther in the solar system. It's absolutely incredible. So my last space flight was in 2007. You probably recognize our commander, Scott Kelly, who spent a year in space. It was a remarkable experience. But I had a chance to do 3 spacewalks going outside into the extreme vacuum of space where temperatures range from minus 200 to over 200 degrees. And we kind of joke and say, if you have a problem spacewalking, you may have the rest of your life to solve the problem. You never know how these things work out. So anyway, night before liftoff, we walk around the base of the space shuttle. I don't know about you guys. I see a picture like this, and I think, tomorrow morning, I'm going to wake up on Earth, and I'm going to go to sleep in space. How amazing is that? It's absolutely incredible. You climb on the Astrovan and you feel like you're joining history, where astronauts have gone before you, and you wonder, where did the Apollo astronauts sit? Where was Neil Armstrong sitting when they went out to the pad and things? It's a truly historic moment. Climb on board the flight deck of the space shuttle, get ready for a ride of a lifetime. And I know you're wondering, what's it like to sit on top of 7.5 million pounds of thrust, going from being stationary to traveling 25 times the speed of sound in 8.5 minutes? Let's have a look. Yep. Let's try this again. Oh, the video's not working. It was working before. Okay, let's press on. It's a ride of a lifetime. You have to trust me on this. You know, the video is really incredible. Just imagine the sound and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, 8.5 minutes later, I hope the other videos work actually. 8.5 minutes later, you get to space and you open the payload bay doors, and 90 minutes later, you've gone around the world once, because basically you're traveling 8 kilometers a second. Snap your fingers and you've gone 8 kilometers. Is it working? Okay, we have liftoff. Yeah.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Endeavour, expanding the International Space Station while creating a classroom in space.
Roger, roll, Endeavour. Houston now controlling the flight of Endeavour. The space shuttle begins its journey back into orbit. Endeavour rolling onto the proper alignment, heads down, wings level for the 8.5-minute ride to orbit, taking aim on the International Space Station for docking on Friday. 30 seconds into the flight, the 3 liquid fuel main engines will soon throttle back to 72% of rated performance in the bucket to reduce the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier. This view from long-range trackers, now from a camera on the external fuel tank showing the bird's eye view of Endeavour heading towards space. 54 seconds into the flight, Endeavour already 8 miles downrange, standing by for the throttle up call from Capcom Chris Ferguson.
Endeavour, go with throttle up.
Go at throttle up.
The throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Scott Kelly, joined on the flight deck by pilot Charlie Hobaugh, flight engineer Rick Mastracchio and Tracy Caldwell, Dave Williams, Al Drew, and Barbara Morgan seated down on the middeck, Morgan racing towards space on the wings of a Legacy.
Wow, every time I see it, I want to go do it again. It's unbelievable. So you get to space, we orbit the Earth every 90 minutes. Flight day 3, we rendezvous and dock with the International Space Station, also traveling 8 kilometers a second, so needless to say, it has to be a nice controlled docking. And when we went on to do the spacewalks, and for the first spacewalk, Rick Mastracchio, my spacewalking partner, went out first. He was EV1. And then for my second and third spacewalks, I went out head first as EV1 as the lead spacewalker. And when you go out the hatch head first, you actually see the Earth above you, which is an amazing view. But when you go out feet first, the view is quite compelling. So let's see if we can have a look at what this is like, and we'll show you a 4K video. Unfortunately, when I flew in space, there was no such thing as 4K video, so this is from Randy Bresnik in 2017, but it's basically what we did as well. Oh, same issue with the video. Let's try it again. No. Not sure what happened with the videos. But anyway, let's press on because time is fleeting. But as we heard earlier, you're out there doing the spacewalk, you look over your shoulder and you can see the northern lights dancing over a quarter of the planet. It's absolutely an unbelievable experience to be able to see that. I was installing a gyroscope on the International Space Station. The gyroscope weighed 1,200 pounds. 650 odd kilograms. I'm holding it in 2 hands. It's like being on a hockey rink and grabbing the Zamboni ice cleaning machine and swinging it around. You know, it's an unbelievable experience. But for me, riding the Canadarm was pretty incredible. And I remember taking this photograph, looking down at the Earth, this 4.5 billion-year-old planet upon which the entire history of the human species has taken place. And it reminds you that you can cherish these moments and really live a lifetime in a moment. Great picture that Scott Kelly took when I was working on the U.S. lab right by the space shuttle. Houston called us and said, take a minute and enjoy the view. Clay Anderson and I were outside. You check your tether, make sure it's locked, and you push away from the space station. You're floating freely in space, looking down through the eye of the storm as Hurricane Dean is in the Gulf of Mexico. Absolutely incredible. They say, go back to work. We turn around. The moon is rising up over the Earth's horizon. So we had to stop, take a picture. They said, what are you doing? So we're just taking photographs of the work site. Everything is good. So then at the end of that spacewalk, I was going back to the airlock. I was 54 at the time. I realized this is probably going to be my last time flying in space. Had to take the selfie, but there was no Twitter in those days, so we couldn't tweet it, but got the selfie anyway, which is pretty incredible. And let's see if we can make this movie play. I'm hoping. There we go. Excellent. Thank you. was in space on my last space flight, I learned to cherish the moments that I was there. The reason why I learned this is I was diagnosed with cancer at age 50 between my first and my second space flight. And I lost all my medical certification as an astronaut, as a pilot, and I had to get it all back. I was very fortunate to be able to do that. And the reason why I wrote an adult book is to be able to share with everyone the importance of living life in the moment, the important opportunity that we all have. And I love this quote by Thoreau when he talks about two eternities, the meeting of two eternities, the past and the future, is precisely the present moment. And if we're able to engage and embrace that moment, it really is possible to live a lifetime in a moment. It's an absolutely incredible experience. So in closing, there we go. In closing, I just wanted to say that I captured all this in a book called Defying Limits, which you can read all about and things. But more importantly, I started off writing books for kids because it's really important to know when you're in space to burp or not to burp. You got to get the book to answer the question. I'll tell you the answer later on if you really want to know. But thank you very, very much for having me, and it's been a real pleasure sharing my experiences with you. Thank you.
I have to just smile at that picture of Dave with a mask as a kid, because I think so many of us, when we started our careers in exploration, you looked at things that's so impossible and so far in the distance, and you can relate to all those images. Unfortunately for me, instead of putting a mask on to think I was an astronaut, I had just seen the movie Mary Poppins, and I believed in the strongest way, after my sister told me to jump off the roof with the umbrella, that I would fly. Didn't work, obviously. So I have a question. Who here was at the annual dinner this past year? Quite a few of you. So every year we have this annual dinner at the Explorers Club where you really have explorers from around the world coming in. And we all know that beyond the 500th anniversary of Magellan, it's also the 50th anniversary of our members walking on the moon. So we had this idea that we would have maybe Buzz Aldrin, another astronaut, come. And, miraculously, 10 people agreed to come, and 8 ended up coming. And we really didn't know what to think because they're so built up to be mythological beings in our world of exploration. And I had the distinct pleasure of ushering them back and forth. And it was just fantastic. We found that these guys were just like everybody else. They stood on their lawns, looked at the stars. They talked about engine sounds. Al Warden, Apollo 16, I was telling him that my father was a pilot. My fondest memories were standing on the lawn, looking at the stars, talking about celestial navigation. And he said that on Apollo 16, he was so nervous about losing electrical power on there that he decided he was going to fly back manually from the moon. And he said that he didn't communicate that with NASA. He said on his own, he knew celestial navigation. He looked out his window and he flew home. And I asked him if there's any time limit for how long you can have goosebumps, when someone tells that story. So recently, at the Paris Air Show, Dr. Bertrand Piccard, who will be here later, got a chance to meet up with some of these astronauts. So we'll see Bertrand a little later in the afternoon, but here's some of the comments of our explorers just a couple weeks ago, I believe.
Hello to everyone, I'm Bertrand Piccard from Solar Impulse, and I've been asked by the Global Explorers Summit in Lisbon for the 500th anniversary of Magellan's round trip to interview 3 heroes of my life and probably of yours. I was a child when they took off with the Apollo missions from Cape Kennedy. I witnessed 6 liftoff of Apollo. I learned so much as a child from these people who inspired me and who are continuously inspiring other people. So what I would like to ask you, because you have been trained, all 3, Al Warden, Charlie Duke, Walter Cunningham, Apollo 7, Apollo 16, Apollo 15. You've been trained as fighter pilots, as test pilots. You've been trained technically, enormously. The first question I have is, have you been trained also emotionally by NASA to overcome all the reaction of the public and to accomplish one of the greatest myths of humankind, that was to go in space? Walter.
I have to tell you, I cannot remember NASA ever addressing one point about emotion on it or trying to discourage you from it. I would suspect that if a person was overly done when it came to emotions, that somebody, possibly even NASA, might speak up. But at the time, the focus was appropriately on the technical challenge that was out there, and were you able to keep your mind to it? They discourage you from behaving inappropriately and things like that.
I think NASA really wasn't prepared or equipped or motivated to do emotional training or any kind of psychological training for us. I know there was an effort at one time to bring in a psychiatrist just to have somebody that we could talk to if we needed to. But on the other hand, I think the training kind of took care of that.
What would you like to say to make the world better?
Actually, I have developed, as I get older, kind of an emotional feel about this, because I feel our culture and our society has been moving away from what I think was very encouraging back when I was young. They didn't discourage sticking your neck out.
Encourage these kids to think about the broad picture and to encourage people to get everybody on the team involved.
If you have one request to the heads of states in this world, because you meet them all, and you have one thing to tell them, what would it be?
So quit trying to discourage what it really is. Everybody is not a winner at everything.
And we're all down here on planet Earth, and we need to learn to get along. And I, for 6 years I said that, but I didn't even get along with my wife. You know, how did I get along with the Japanese or everything else? If we learn to love one another, then I think we can do it through the power of God. And that certainly happened in my life. And so I used to travel the world telling leaders of the world just what I just told you.
That the human species may have limited time on this planet Earth that we live on. We know that ultimately the sun is going to burn out, and that is going to be the end of civilization if we live here, if we're still living here. But in the meantime, there are a lot of things going on that are making life on Earth a lot shorter than it could have been. And I think it's a message to all the leaders of the world that the survival of the human species is in their hands, and that if they don't do the right things, we're going to disappear from the face of the Earth before the sun burns out.
So thank you so much. Al Worden, Apollo 15.
Pleasure.
Charlie Duke, Apollo 16. Walter Cunningham, Apollo 7. You are my heroes, and I'm sure you are the heroes of all the people who are watching us.
Well,
thank you
Bernard,
so much.
You should know you're our hero too.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I really respect you.
You bet.
We admired what you did.
Yes. And continue to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to you.
Thanks.
All right, well, Lindy and I are back. Last week, NASA had a news flash about a new robotic exploration mission that I think is about the coolest, most out there thing that NASA has ever planned to do in robotic exploration. Get this, NASA announced last week that it's going to build and fly a mission to go to one of Saturn's moons, Titan, and basically fly a nuclear-powered drone from place to place around this planet-sized object. It's bigger than the planet Mercury, to explore it. And the place itself is mind-blowing. Lindy?
Titan is the second largest moon in the solar system. Anybody know the first largest moon in the solar system? Ganymede, anybody? Ganymede, yep. Much, much bigger than the Earth's moon. Its radius is almost a half of the Earth's radius, and it's the only moon with a really thick, dense atmosphere. It has a nitrogen-based atmosphere, the same as the Earth, but not nitrogen and oxygen like the Earth. It has nitrogen and methane. And so this is truly another little world, like one that we have never have explored before. So we'll go into this dense atmosphere with this nuclear-powered quadcopter that's going to fly around, because Titan has got a climate cycle, a weather cycle like on the Earth. It snows methane. And methane and other hydrocarbons they flow down through mountain chains, creating dendritic drainage systems just like on the Earth, and they fill up hydrocarbon oceans. And we're going to go look for life.
Yeah, Titan is the belle of the ball. It is probably the closest scientific analog to the early Earth, where we can learn about how biology got started on our planet as well. And so this mission, which was just selected after an intense, fierce competition between a dozen teams that started off to build a $1 billion+ mission, different missions with different concepts at various places in the solar system, just got selected last week. They will launch in 2026. The spacecraft will fly across the solar system to Saturn and then make its atmospheric entry into Titan through its atmosphere to make its first of many landings on the surface in 2034 to explore on that surface for years. And then there's a great story about the leader of that mission.
The leader of this mission is a woman named Elizabeth Turtle. To her friends, she's Zibby Turtle. She and I were undergrads at the same time. And so we have another woman leading a space mission. It's another big step toward inclusion and diversity. And that makes me even more excited about this crazy new mission. All right.
Yeah, so we have the pleasure of introducing a short video clip to tell you more about this spectacular mission called Dragonfly.
Thanks.
Don't you get the feeling that you're going to see this on Amazon? You know, buy your little dragonfly. One of our members, obviously Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. So I'm going to ask everybody to do something. I know you haven't done this entire thing. Take out your phone for a second, because I know everyone has it switched off and it's in their purse and stuff like that, right? So, you know, just take an image, anything there, and sort of expand it, contract it, contract it. That is called the squeeze technology. Our next speaker invented that, along with a whole lot of other things. He is, if you ask him what he does, he says, I invent cool things, beyond cool things. You know, and he comes to exploration really in an interesting way. His parents were artists, and he was an engineer. So I'd like to say that he made art into a science, and he made science into an art. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Applied Minds' Brand Ferrin.
So it's a pleasure to be here to speak to you today in this beautiful city, in this beautiful center, which is remarkable. First time I've been at a cork podium before. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is, first of all, not the talk you're used to. At a conference like this, you get lots of thoughtful, well-structured talks. This won't be one of them. It has no scientific rigor. I'm going to ramble on about things which are technical oversimplifications, my sort of random thoughts, and think of it more as personal opinion than scientific fact. Sorry. And I have 15 minutes to give you a 90-minute talk, so I'm going to leave out every other word and talk quickly. But like many other parents, and my daughter Kira is sitting over there, I'm troubled about the state of the world that we are getting ready to hand over to our kids. While we are surrounded by extraordinary technical achievements, every day there's some new miracle, whether it's cloud computing or whether it's learning about black holes and dark matter, or whether it's cloud computing, or whether it's CRISPR. The list is endless of things which, every one of which is poised to change our notions of ourselves and what our world is. We're not being particularly good custodians of the natural world, and that's a problem. It's also a problem because we don't seem to have a good set of tools to be able to deal with this class of challenge. And so what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about this. You look at our connected world, it's never been this way before. I was amused to note that there are 9 billion working cell phones in the world, and considering there are only 7.7 billion people, some of you must have more than one. But with all of these remarkable accomplishments where language barriers are collapsing, the bulk of scientific knowledge, the bulk of exploration, and the fruits of that have become available at our fingertips, literally. What are we going to do about the world of nature and the world of living things which are seriously at risk? It is concerning to me that the scientific communities are well aware of the impacts of climate change, of polluting our air, polluting our water, but we don't seem to be effectively communicating that to leadership who can make a difference, or to the public who can pressure people to make a difference. The media coverage, rather than activating people, I think is numbing people. The fact is they just don't want to hear about it anymore, because the sense is this is a problem of a magnitude that they have no personal ability to affect. And so the result is generally you disengage if you can't deal with that. And it's also leading to, I think, an unfortunate cynicism along the lines of, do we really care if we lose a cute little frog in the rainforest somewhere? The notion that species are disappearing at a rate unprecedented in history, except for the occasional asteroid extinction and such, but fortunately that doesn't happen too often. But most people just don't care, or if they do care, they're not in a position to have an effect. And so the big question for me is, can we do something about this, and do we have tools, technology, sensibility, something that gives us a tool to think in the near term? And when I say near term, I mean 250 years or so. I mean, that's a blink of an eye on geological time. But unfortunately, it far exceeds our ability to plan and work against. I've heard of 2 Japanese companies that have 250-year plans. Typical companies that I'm familiar with, such as American companies, have a 5-year plan. They're serious about the first 18 months, and then the rest is just a spreadsheet which you make look good enough for your investors 5 years later that they won't throw you out. That's long-term planning. Well, unfortunately, a lot of things on a global basis, climate change, et cetera, have very long time constants. And by the time you actually realize that you have been inadvertently or advertently causing damage, it can be too late. Or if not too late, it can take an enormous period of time, an enormous amount of cost to correct. we have to tell this story better. We have to get people to understand that there are things that they can do. And in fact, one of the reasons it's a pleasure to talk to all of you is that I believe an organization such as the Explorers Club has the ability to actually do that, to communicate different ideas, ways of changing policy. But the question is, how do we do it? And the question is, if let's say we're talking about a 250-year time span, which for a lot of the big global issues facing us is probably an adequate planning horizon, how do we achieve this, especially in the face of a citizenship of the world with a vanishingly short attention span? Our attention span has been going down, not up. And all of these great wonders of intercommunication and the wonders of the internet and the wonders of modern communications, television, radio, et cetera, are driving down our attention span. And it is staggering how many citizens of our world, how many leaders of our world get their news of the world from sound bites, tweets, and snippets of often wrong information. And science is at risk. And the role of science and scientists to inform us is not what it used to be. And we saw remarkable things about the International Space Station, work that's going on. How many of you know how many people are on the space station at the moment, what they're doing, what their science is, what the impact is? I would hazard to say not many, and myself included. Because while it used to be when I was growing up, you watched every space launch, you watched Walter Cronkite, who was the voice that our family listened to, explain the world and what was going on. Same person you watched cry when President Kennedy was assassinated, the same person choked up when the first man set foot on the world. But we don't have that voice anymore. We don't have the attention and focus of the communities, and science is devalued. Just go out in the street and ask someone to name a scientist. You'll probably get Einstein. You ask for a living scientist, you get Carl Sagan. And the reality is we don't have role models in the sciences. We don't have people that little girls, little boys can look up to and say, I want to be one of those. And again, I think that exploration is one of those things that can capture people's imagination to know how to make this better. I think that the challenge is we also have leaders who are not accountable. How many leaders of the world today are going to be held accountable in 200 years for the terrible decision they made now? And what process is there to make sure that that doesn't happen? How do we make smart daily decisions on things that will have impact hundreds of years from now, especially when they're unpopular, because they require sacrifice or they require expenditures of monies that can go to more pressing things. Not to mention the fact that sustaining long-term visions and goals is very difficult with leadership that rotates out of their job quickly. And this doesn't matter if it's in a corporation or in the military, in government, in politics. Generally speaking, the only thing I've learned after years of working with them is the common attribute of leaders is the one thing they are not interested in was the vision of their predecessor. And the idea of carrying forth with something that their predecessor came with, it's a rare leader who actually believes in that. So the real question is, what do we do about this? And how do we keep some of these great technological wonders that are unfolding before us literally daily? How do we make sure that they serve the benefit of our civilization and our planet and the species that inform it? Some people think that you should take a Luddite-like view and we should just stop exploration, stop research, stop advancing these frontiers, stop the creative byproduct of humans. Doesn't work. It's never worked in the past. You can, if you work hard enough, create a dark ages by actually believing in that sort of thing. But it's contrary to the human spirit, and that never works, because either you drive that elsewhere, as we saw happen in the United States when stem cell research was largely restricted. Best researchers just went elsewhere to do it, or they go underground and continue their work and their thinking, because you can't stop human creativity. You can add rules, you can add ways of ethics, you can put responsibility on top of it, but The reality is slowing things down isn't a good strategy. So what is and what is on this topic? I actually think there is a new emerging discipline which is starting to happen. And I had never heard of it until I was asked to keynote the first conference on it. And I said yes, and then it occurred to me perhaps I should learn something about the subject I'm doing the keynote on. And it's a practice that combines map making, GIS, it combines economics, it combines urban and city planning, resource administration, atmospherics, hydrology, and storytelling. And most people have never even heard the word. It's called geodesign. How many of you are familiar with geodesign as a practice? I see 4 hands in the room. Well, geodesign, you can now get advanced degrees from universities in geodesign. Geodesign is a thing. When I did the first keynote on it, this was in 2008, there were about 40,000 entries with the word geodesign, other than companies that were named that, but of just about the discipline. I checked again 3 years later when I was invited back to the conference, it was up to 500,000. And now it's actually a real force, but it's a force that most people have never heard of, and it's a force that directly connects to exploration and, in fact, the importance of it. And tools are critical to everything. They're critical to both exploration and giving people, if you're going to go to the bottom of the deepest place in the ocean, you need a tool to get there. Wanting to isn't good enough. Magellan needed a compass, as it turns out, and so as we commemorate this circumnavigation. The role of tools has always been critical. Storytellers need tools, whether it's a transmission medium or a camera or a microphone. But this idea of geodesign is very simple. It uses GIS and modeling. It uses modern high-performance simulation, generally run on cloud computing platforms or sometimes smaller ones. And what it does is by combining these things, data sources, the output of what has recently been discovered, modeling and simulation, visualization technology, the ability to animate and such, it actually lets you to predict the actions you are taking in an urban environment, in a natural resource environment, to see the future. And I've seen early examples of this where people were deciding where to site wind farms. Where's the wind below? How do you understand this? What are the impacts on wildlife, on birds? What are the impacts on noise? What are the impacts if you have rotors which are metallic on television and radio reception, generating multipath and such? These are very complex problems, but what geodesign is lets you put these all together, and it puts it into pictures or it puts it into movies. And for a lot of people, especially in this visual soundbite-driven world, seeing is believing. And if you can actually see the thing happen before you and understand your consequences. And what geodesign is doing for the first time is letting people like urban planners and geologists and architects all work together on driving these models and then optimize around the best design. What's critical about it is, unlike mapping or a whole variety of functions which are largely related to documenting what is, what geodesign is about is taking all of that and allowing you to look forward. It's a way to predict the future. It's a way to evaluate many futures, and it's the ability to actually interact so that you, whether you're a planner or a student, have the ability to, for lack of a better word, turn the knobs and see what the consequences are. What happens if you make a building 10 stories taller? What's it do to the wind patterns? I saw an interesting, fascinating, and quite creepy set of geodesign simulations on contaminant plumes underneath the city of Los Angeles. What benzene, what other things that have seeped into the ground, where are they going? And in 15 years, will it hit your well that happens to be there? And you can watch these things happen in front of you. The ability to put these things together, I think, creates not only a new type of collaboration, which is important, but it creates a new form of storytelling. A way to tell stories, and contrary to what you may have heard, storytelling, I think, is the world's oldest profession. And it's one which allows you to reach out and say, look, You're not going to see this effect for 92 years. So it's going to be your grandchildren's grandchildren's who are going to live those. But when you do, it's going to render the land uninhabitable. What do you want to do about it? Putting this here means you lose 15 species here. I'm oversimplifying, but what geodesign is an emerging discipline which allows us to do this. And it also has the ability to be interactive, which means the Explorers Club website could be a portal which allows you to go live to see expeditions as they're taking place. Look at the immediate consequences of new knowledge and discovery as it's being found, being plugged into these simulation models to give us greater insight about our world and greater insight about our future. Storytelling is critical because, in my view, every great leader was a great storyteller. It doesn't matter if it was a Winston Churchill or if it was a Steve Jobs announcing the Mac Air and sliding it out of a manila envelope. I was there, it didn't fit in a manila envelope. They had to make a manila envelope exactly the right size to do it, but he didn't have to say anything. That announced what this product was about. Explorers who risk their lives to explore and illuminate the unknown are the pointy tip of the sword, which is where those data that become what drives geodesign models will come from. It harnesses the strength of our planet, our explorers, our designers, our inventors, our storytellers, and puts them all together in a way that we've never seen before. I would put forth geodesign can change the very process of exploration the same way it is urban planning, because it actually tells you where to explore. Should you be to the left? Should you be looking at the surface of a planet? Should you be looking underneath? It provides a key to emotionally engage us on topics that are generally too scientifically challenging for most people to grasp. And if you're going to change the world, you have to get most people, and particularly the leaders and the policymakers, to grasp it, or it isn't going to change. It lets us quickly test a hypothesis. It lets us make these near-term decisions that will have long-term consequences. I'm out of time, but I truly believe that combining these skills and knowledge, the passion of people who are driven to explore and seek out the unknown and seek out understanding, geodesign will be potentially the way to put that together and translate it into a form that makes it accessible to the world. I believe in that case that rather than a grim future where we're looking at extinction of species, we're looking at poisoned air and water, I think actually it gives us the tools to make a truly great world for our kids and for their kids and all of us as custodians of this remarkable planet. Thank you.
Truly, where are you? Hiding from me. I need my little geo design thing to figure where he goes next. We met, I believe we met in March. When did we meet? March, April, June. And I thought to myself immediately, this guy's got to be one of us. He is one of us. So I asked and I pleaded, and I said, can you fill out an application? And just last week, by special vote, Brand became a new member, class of 19 of the Explorers Club. I'm going to give you your pin. I'm going to try to do this without stabbing him. Perfect. All the things you were talking about, you made me sign this form I couldn't talk about.
Of course.
Welcome our newest member of the Explorers Club.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe we have Alex Moore coming up. Oh, here's Alex, one of the architects of this event, Alex Moore.
Good afternoon. What a program. I wonder who came up with it. As all of you explorers know, collaboration across disciplines is a key component of any successful expeditions. And only at the Explorers Club, really, we highlight such collaboration and really value it. As someone who works in such a collaborative endeavor day and night in 3 different jobs, it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker from a leading organization right here dedicated to this effort right here in Portugal, in fact, in the beautiful Azores. It is the Atlantic International Research Center, the AIR Center, in the Azores, where scientists from all Atlantic nations can collaborate in the fields of climate, space, and ocean science, which is very, very much needed, as this conference is highlighting today. To tell you more about that, here is José Luis Moutinho, Chief Business Developer in the Atlantic International Research Center.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm very excited. I feel like I was 50 years ago, I was 10 years old. I was watching this small black and white TV in Brazil, where I was born in Rio de Janeiro, watching Neil Armstrong setting for the first time his foot on the moon. It was very exciting, so exciting that I always kept involved somehow understanding space exploration. And in fact, my daughter, now she's a specialist in rivers in Mars. So she's working on UT Austin. And my son, he's only 16, and his dream is to become a cosmologist. So it's very interesting. But I will talk about the other uses of space exploration. I will focus on collaboration with societal impact of space exploration. I will talk about the Atlantic International Research Center. Normally we see the world like oceans and land separated. But lately, with all these exclusive economic zones and exploration of the sea for all purposes, from fisheries to deep sea mining, the map changed completely. And that is our focus of the Air Center, linking land and ocean to better understand how to preserve ocean and coastal ecosystem, but also bringing value to people living around the Atlantic Ocean. And so this center is a very long process, of scientific diplomacy initiated by Portugal. It started in 2017, actually in 2016, in several workshops. We held more than 60 workshops all over the world. And we had very big, high-level meetings, ministers for countries all over the Atlantic Ocean. And what I would like to bring to you today is another perspective of space exploration. It's not looking to the stars, it's not looking to the planets, but look to the Earth. That's the main goal of the Air Center, using Earth observation for societal impact. I will show you some examples of what we have been doing lately. And actually, in this process, it's always consultation. This was the very first meeting in Azores in 2017. You can see ministers from all over the world, Nigeria, South Africa, Portugal. And this was the second meeting in Florianopolis in November 2017, where we signed a declaration that decided to create the Air Center. And again, another high-level meeting in May 2018 decided to be the scope of the scientific agenda of the Air Center. Continuing with this meeting, we had a new meeting in Canary Islands, so we decided that, okay, this implementation phase is already completed. Now we have to set up a real organization, and we founded a not-for-profit organization based on the Azores that is leading the way to collaborate around the Atlantic. Other countries joined us. For example, this is the Minister of Norway signing together with Minister Manuel Vitor from Portugal, their participation in the Air Center. We had our last meeting in Nigeria. It was very interesting. And then we signed a letter of intent to create let's say, a business environment for all the countries, including Namibia, Ghana, São Tomé and Príncipe, Cape Verde, Uruguay, to build their own nanosatellites and create an all-Atlantic constellation focused on fisheries and aquaculture data for preservation of normal fishing. So we are based on the Azores, in the middle of the nowhere, so we are really specialists in oceans. And it's very hard to get there, very hard to go, to come back from the Azores. Our last 3 meetings had problems. We had problems to land the plane. We had tempest, but it was very interesting. And anyway, we could move all these countries around the Atlantic in a single purpose, in a collaborative framework. It's very interesting. And in the darker background, we have Spain, Portugal, Cape Verde, São Tomé, Nigeria, Angola, South Africa, Brazil, and Uruguay. They are very much involved on producing, in fostering collaboration and developing projects. And now we are finalizing negotiations with Norway, UK, Senegal, Mauritania, Ghana, Namibia, and also with Argentina for them to become part of this big network. We also engaged with the US through the universities. We work with the MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Penn State University, University of Texas at Austin, and now we are negotiating also with University of North Carolina, Charlotte. So we are trying to not to discuss different science, but putting all these different science together in a multidimensional approach to better understand the Atlantic Ocean. We have there the marine resource and biodiversity, clean and healthy oceans, Earth observation is very important for us based on satellite imagery, but also in situ observations, mitigation adaptation to climate change, renewables offshore energies, and very important data science. I'll show you now some example of projects that we've been developing lately. But first, in fact, and why we're trying to collaborate around the Atlantic? It's very complicated, the relationship between North and South. So actually we are pulling resources together to address large, complex problems, trying to align national priorities with global challenges like the Paris Agreement, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and also the Sendai Framework for Disaster Reduction. And the idea is also to increase solutions robustness. I was in another meeting like half an hour ago discussing exactly user needs. I came from this meeting, Eurogeos, that is being held in the Pavilhão do Conhecimento, because although they have a lot of new applications related to Earth observation, nobody's using, and the final impact on the social tissue is very low still. So I will show you how we try to address this. So we are increasing the odds of success, decreasing cost, trying to amplify the results of Earth observation, lefting no one behind, and most important, benefit from diversity. It's unbelievable what we learn discussing with fishermen in Cape Verde or fishermen in Angola, what they do want in terms of space exploration. Actually, we are building together missions to be launched in this all-Atlantic satellite constellation. We work trying to define the high priority topics with these countries, identify the key needs, elaborate the initiative, and try to get funds to implement these initiatives, but also at the same time monitor and evaluate the fruition of these services so we can get better and better services for the final users. We have a lot of different institutions involved that was said, from Brazil, US, Portugal, United Nations Office for Outer Space. We assigned new MOUs with universities from Namibia, from University of Ghana, but also with the lead institution of South Africa. And also we created an Earth Observation Laboratory at the Azores together with ESA, Geo Marine Biodiversity Observation Network, and Geo Blue Planet. So why is that? I'll show you a simple example, what we can bring to space missions. We've been talking with people all over the Atlantic about fisheries, aquaculture, biodiversity, and marine spatial planning. Why? To identify potential marine resources, initiatives that we could put people together, working together, and collaborating around the Atlantic. We met people from the Azores and Canary Islands. It was very interesting because they were worried in Canary Islands, they were worried about managing their maritime resources, such as shipbuilding, how we could help them to avoid piracy attacks, for example. In terms of the Azores, they were focused on biodiversity hotspots. We met people in Cape Verde, and the main focus over there was to have ice, as simple as that. We've been meeting people everywhere in Cape Verde and talking to fishermen. They said, we don't need any specific technology. We only need electricity, clean water, and ice. If I have ice, I can produce much more fresh fish. I will be rich only with ice. So we are now trying to develop with ESA a project called Space for Microgrids, using Earth observation data to find the best place to implement microgrids so they can produce ice in the fishing villages in Cape Verde. And also we've been in São Tomé and Príncipe discussing again space exploration, and their worry was malaria. And we tried to explain that it would be very interesting to use Earth observation for other purpose. They said we could use it, but first help us to solve our problem with malaria. And now we are trying to also working with the European Space Agency to use Earth observation to predict the evolution of vectors, airborne vectors like mosquitoes of malaria, so they can predict where and how to act in the future. And also they asked us to help them to monitor their forests because they live from cocoa. And when you cut the trees, simply cocoa disappears. So we are working together with FAO, United Nations, to find ways of monitoring from space the forest in the Azores, in the São Tomé and Príncipe. And also we went to Angola, and we asked, what could we do together? And they said, listen, we are worried about our mangroves. So please use Earth observation, satellite imagery, in situ observation to develop services, operational services for us to use to monitor one of the most important ecosystems they have in Angola, that they're mangroves. That's where they're trying to work now with them, how to do that from space. So another interesting project we did is gathering students from Ghana. I spent the whole weekend in the biggest electrical dump in Africa. It's called Agbogbloshie, dump site. And why was that? Because they burn wires 24 hours a day to get copper out of this wire. So we linked, satellite positioning tools together with very, very cheap sensors we developed using Raspberry Pi to show with the students from Manchester University to show them how dangerous it is to burn these wires 24 hours a day. In fact, when you are in Agbogbloshie, if you're talking with somebody with a glass of water, you have to put your hand on top of it because in 2 minutes you'll be covered by ashes. And that's they lived. When we concluded the project, we discovered that they have 11.5 more, particulate matters than the maximum allowed. So that shows you how we are using space observation to get to people. And helping fishermen also in Ghana with a very simple projects, meaning instead of have very complex applications on their mobile phones, they are only using 1, 2, 3, 4. Meaning 1, you can fish, no problem. 2, you stay at home. No, 2, and then be aware. 3, go and fish. It will be our problem. And 4, stay home. So as simple as that is saving lives with very simple applications. But behind that, there's a lot of very complex, space satellite applications. So for all of that, we are developing a very big data infrastructure. We are creating the Air Data Net where all these countries can have direct access for high power computing. We are linking Barcelona, Texas, Minho Advanced Computing Center, 3 entities in Brazil and now South Africa, so they can access and they can explore their data and they can make informed decision using this very interesting infrastructure. We also working on developing a catalog of Earth observation applications for the Atlantic together with all these, that's where I come from, Eurogeos now. And finally, this is the most interesting part related to what we've been discussing here, is that in the outcome, we are trying to put together all these countries, more than 20 countries together to develop a very, let's say, simple space mission to put together nanosatellites and create a constellation to monitor fishing and aquaculture for all these countries. They don't have sometimes basic information as bathymetry, ocean dynamics. Sometimes they invest in big deep sea investments related to oil, but in fact, all these people around The Atlantic live in the coasts, and there's not much information about how they can better live, better fish, and even aquaculture around the Atlantic without this satellite information. So the very last project that we are involved is very exciting. We are working together with the European Space Agency. We are trying to develop a new sensor that could detect plastic from space. So this is very interesting. There is some signatures of plastic that can be seen. We are trying now to work with drones and airplanes, and then to develop a satellite-grade sensor that could map all the plastic and try to tackle all this mapping pollution, the plastic pollution around the world. Always coupled with ocean dynamics and other ways of understanding and collecting data and provided information with societal impact. So thank you very much. These are our contacts. We are only 3.5. Actually, one is part-time. Right.
So I'm going to announce where lunch is, but first you have to sit through the announcement before I actually give you the directions, because you will not find it on your own. The other aspect, you may have noticed a very interesting lectern here. This is actually made of cork. We are in cork country. And the company that made this is called Amorin. And many of you have gotten in your rooms something on cork and cork products. It's a wonderful material. Brand, you said you have a cork tree in your backyard, so give you something to think about back at home. So we have a quick announcement. I'd like Mead Treadwell, who's come from Alaska, who is our Vice President of Chapter Relations, and Sinove Crum, who's in Chapter Relations for the Explorers Club, to come and give you an announcement. So, lady and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. I'm Mead Treadwell, and Sinove Stromsvag is with me. Sinove, by the way, is one of the organizers of this meeting. Sinove, thank you very much. And a member of the board of directors of the Explorers Club. We have a special announcement to make today that the Explorers Club Executive Committee meeting this week, we approved the 34th chapter of this now very international global club, a chapter in Bhutan. Ladies and gentlemen, let's please welcome the new Explorers Club chapter from Bhutan.
Thank you, Sinove. Now, I just want to throw down the gauntlet because we have some European friends here. Portugal. Don't you think we need a chapter here? My friends in Portugal, you're raising your hand. I have some friends from Spain. Where are they? Vice Admiral of the Navy. Where are they? They're still here? We need a chapter in Spain. But let's start with the Portuguese chapter. We got the momentum going. We'll figure out how to do it, right? Okay, let there be light. So lunch, if you go out around the building, there's an outdoor amphitheater right on the river there. Lunch is going to be served there. It's 30 minutes. Please talk to the speakers who spoke. This is the exchange of ideas. I can tell you, because I know most of you, are very approachable people. So don't be shy. Go out and have lunch. Speak to your fellow explorer. And I'll see you in 30 minutes.